actually ended about an hour or so ago. These are some of the remarks that they made at the conclusion of their summit.
Directed our finance ministers to examine the feasibility and viability of setting up a new development bank for mobilizing resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging economies and developing countries to supplement the existing efforts of multilateral and regional financial institutions for global growth and development.
A number of substantial outcomes, such as the launch of the BRICS Business Council and the consortium of think tanks, as well as the enabling agreement between our development banks to enhance financing of projects in Africa and for sustainable development, signify the promise of intra-BRICS cooperation. This being the first BRICS summit on African soil, it is only appropriate that it includes a special BRICS India event, and I look forward keenly to our interaction with African leaders.
We have taken important steps to creating a development bank, as we decided today, a bank the funding of which should be in line with the size of its challenge. And it will as such be our contribution to the global economy in one of its most decisive dimensions. I'm talking about development financing. Also today we launched efforts to establish a contingent reserve arrangement. These mechanisms are aimed at strengthening cooperation as well as economic and financial interaction among BRICS. We have also shared our views and vision on the overarching challenges that we all share, challenges pertaining to sustainable development, social inclusion, industrial competitiveness, as well as peace and security.
We're determined to make every effort to further promote BRICS, thanks to the active position of our hosts. This time, BRICS meeting was very active, very productive. Today, BRICS leaders approved a joint declaration that reflects common approaches of our countries to a broad range of international political and economic issues. The plan of action for the next year is very ambitious, covering new areas of cooperation, information security, combating drug trafficking, terrorism, expansion of exchanges between our young people, cultural exchanges. We spoke about economic cooperation. Russia supports the idea of establishment of the BRICS Development Bank. We hope that we'll continue working at the expert level.
The development of BRICS countries has a bright future. BRICS countries are in the process of launching or deepening the process of industrialization, IT application, urbanization, and agricultural modernization. This will represent strong impetus for economic growth. BRICS countries are deepening results-oriented cooperation in economic, trade, science, technology, cultural, people-to-people, and other areas. This represents new growth opportunities for us. The leaders of the 5 countries are full of confidence in the future development of BRICS countries. Second, BRICS cooperation enjoys huge potential.
Well, of course, leaders of the 5 countries that comprise the BRICS countries. They're making remarks at the conclusion of their formal session as heads of state. Of course, the people who are going to drive the processes that were spoken about here over the past 24 or so hours are led mainly by business groupings. They have set up a BRICS Business Council. Now, the BRICS Business Council comprises of business councils from the 5 different countries. Now, Patrice Motsepe is the head, the chairperson of South Africa's BRICS Business Council. He made some remarks earlier today about what it is that as business councils they hope to do, and here is some of what he had to say earlier this morning.
The last thing from a South African perspective is that we will have an extensive consultation process, because we do indeed, there's a way in which big business operates, which is very important, because at the global level you need these big businesses. But we also have to create opportunities for women-owned businesses, for youth-owned businesses, for businesses from the rural areas, as well as for SMMEs. And I'm very, very excited that both within the broad consultation process we are going to initiate in South Africa, but also at the global level, that the Business Council will deliver on the very important aspirations that our leaderships, our presidents have set for us, but also how we can improve the standards of living, create jobs, and give a better future for all our people. The last thing from a South African perspective is that
Patrice Motsepe, the chairperson of South Africa's BRICS Business Council, talking about what they as business are planning to do to take the BRICS agenda forward. Of course, the other 4 councils from the other countries, which is India, Brazil, China, did also make some remarks, essentially saying pretty much what Patrice Motsepe had to say there. Of course, there is an issue that has been raised by a lot of civil society organizations, but also trade unions about their participation. They seem to have an issue with business being elevated to a level above that of theirs. In their belief, they also should have been part of the proceedings here and should enjoy a status equal to that of business. They have reasons, of course, to advance that particular argument. COSATU was among trade unions from Brazil, from China, from India, and from Russia, which raised similar sort of issues. They met on Monday, and after that they had some comments to make. They are not necessarily dissing the agenda of BRICS, but do make a point that arguing for their inclusion. And here is some of what they had to say following their meeting a couple of days ago.
The forum says its biggest complaint was being left out of the summit and yet have business represented. The forum, in one voice, called for the effective and full participation of what it termed the working class in all BRICS institutions.
Only in that way will BRICS be different from existing multinational institutions.
BRICS unions cautiously welcomed the proposed bank. It called on the bank to be different from the Brandwood institutions.
We want this bank to exist, but we also want it to be different from existing banks in multilateral arrangements that take place today. So that's why we received the creation of the bank with caution.
The forum says the emergence of BRICS should present the potential to organize itself into a progressive force around which various struggles could be coordinated. It will hand over its declaration to the South African government to present to the summit. Lehana Zoteti, SABC News, Durban.
Well, if you just joined us, you're watching a live broadcast. We're coming to you from the Inkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Center here in Durban. Now, the 5 countries that comprise BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have been meeting here. Leaders of the respective governments have been here talking about an agenda that will advance the interests of their respective countries. Now, a lot has been said, agreements have been signed, and right now, as we speak, they are at Zimbabwe Lodge, where they are now meeting with 15 heads of African state, and that was after they concluded their own session as BRICS countries here at the Chief Albert Luthuli International Convention Center. They also had a very brief briefing. The comments you saw them making earlier were made at the conclusion of that formal session, which ended about 1.5 hours, 2 hours ago or so. And as I said, they are now about to meet the 5 BRICS leaders, that is, are about to meet with the heads of state of 15 African countries. The reason they are meeting these African countries is essentially twofold. One, it is to take to them the agenda that these BRICS nations are going to follow, to brief them on that, but also to talk about how Africa as a continent stands to benefit from this particular relationship. But they are doing that also because Africa has some of the fastest growing economies are in fact African countries. Some of the economies that are going to grow at the fastest rate over the next few years are African nations. So Africa is indeed the go-to continent at the moment, and the BRICS countries, South Africa included, do not want to miss out on the opportunities that are presented by the growth that we're seeing across the continent, the growth that the rest of the world is in fact seeing at the moment. Now, you heard what trade unions from 5 BRICS countries had to say about their inclusion or lack of. Earlier in the day, I spoke to Steve Price Thomas, a representative of Oxfam, who was talking about civil society's inclusion in the BRICS conversations, or the lack of inclusion of the BRICS civil society organizations, arguing that the inclusion of business only may in fact deprive these BRICS nations of an essential or of a critical voice that has some value to add in the discussions. This is how our conversation went. Steve Price Thomas, welcome to the program, and thanks very much for joining us.
Great, thanks for having me.
Well, a lot has been said about the involvement or lack of non-governmental organizations, but civil society broadly at this BRICS summit.
Sure. We're seeing here that the private sector and business leaders really seem to have very privileged access to the BRICS leaders. Maybe the BRICS leaders have got stars in their eyes for the potential of the private sector, but civil society, who represent the citizens of the BRICS countries and the world more broadly, are completely excluded from the summit, and that's a problem.
I mean, from where you sit, have you and other like-minded civil society organizations made any attempt to speak to the politicians and business about that, shall we say, omission?
Sure, and I think that message has been heard, and I'm hopeful that for the next summit in Brazil, maybe things will be different. But certainly here, it has been an issue. There's been a BRICS business breakfast, for example. There's been a range of other private sector events, but there hasn't been anything formally linked to the summit for civil society. Civil society has organised itself. There's been an exciting range of activities in Durban, but we need to be able to interface with the summit.
Now, had you been given an opportunity to be part of the proceedings, what would you have been keen to put on the table?
Well, from Oxfam's perspective, the key thing is that the BRICS process must work to and inequality has increased in recent years in every BRIC country apart from Brazil. So it's essential that the BRICS process works to reduce poverty and inequality and meet the needs of poor citizens across the BRICS and now in the world more broadly.
What would have been your part? In other words, what specific part would you have been keen, are you keen to play as civil society, and how would you have presented that to both the government leaders, the leaders of the respective governments, and a big business?
Well, I can't speak for all of civil society.
No, definitely, but yeah.
But from Oxfam's perspective, we would be keen to have a dialogue space where diverse voices from civil society can bring their messages to the BRICS leaders so that they're able to raise up the issues which are of a concern for them. For Oxfam, the concerns are around poverty, around inequality.
Well, is there something, though, that the BRICS group of countries can do differently from what other similar sort of groupings, whether it's the G7 or any other such organizations? Is there something that this particular group of countries can do differently?
Sure. I mean, there's some good experience even within the BRICS. So we're seeing that Brazil, for example, has managed to make very significant strides in reducing inequality over the past 10 years. In that time, the income of the poorest 10% of people in Brazil has risen 5 times faster than the income of the richest 10%. The income of women has risen faster than men. The income of black people has risen faster than the income of white people. So there's been, something very special has happened in Brazil, and President Rousseff, who's here today in Durban, announced just a month ago that Brazil has now completely eradicated extreme poverty, which is a very significant experience. So it would be great if the other BRICS leaders could learn from that experience and maybe put in place some of the policies that Brazil has successfully used. I mean, not that Brazil is perfect by any means. Inequality is still too high. They still have some other issues, but in that sense, they're a useful model.
You have a presence in Brazil, is that correct?
We do, yes.
Now, what, in your own assessment, what are the things that Brazil has been doing right compared to, for example, South Africa or India?
Right. I mean, I think there's 3 main areas of what has made the Brazilian experience work. First is that there's been very strong political commitment, and also when they emerged from their military regime, they put in place a constitution which enshrines the right to food and other basic rights. And then when President Lula was elected in 2003, he was elected on a platform of reducing poverty, reducing inequality. He did that by putting in place almost immediately a minimum wage program. He put in place a program of pensions for universal pensions, transfers to people with disabilities and so on. So he did a number of actions, almost immediately, showing the political commitment. Secondly, there's a very strong civil society in Brazil and a long history of social movements, and they worked positively with the administration to deliver some of this, but also worked to hold them to account, to make sure that they actually did what they promised they were going to do. And I think those social organizations had a very strong role to play. And then thirdly, the Brazilian administration coordinated well. I mean, like any public administration, the Brazilian administration is not perfect. They've got issues of corruption and, patronage like any public administration, but it's pretty good in Brazil, and they managed to coordinate across 19 ministries to make this happen. So whilst there's some famous headline programs like their Bolsa Familia program, which pays cash transfers to poor women to keep their kids in school and to get them vaccinated. That kind of program has been important, but it's not a magic bullet, and it's taken this coordinated action, strong political will, the government, the public service, and social movements playing their part to achieve this.
Commitment, political will, social movements playing their parts. Steve Price-Thomas from Oxfam, thanks very much for talking to us. Steve Price-Thomas from Oxfam, sharing some of the experience that Oxfam, the things that Oxfam has seen in places like Brazil, which they believe other BRICS countries and indeed the rest of the world could indeed emulate and make this world a better place. Well, if you've just joined us, you're watching a live broadcast. We're coming to you from Inkosi Albert Lutuli International Convention Center here in Durban. But the pictures you're seeing on your screen now are of African leaders from all over the continent. They are about to meet the 5 heads of state from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. We've been meeting here at the Inkosi Albert Lutuli Convention Center, but now the 5 leaders are going to be meeting with the 15 heads of state and government from the rest of the continent. The idea really being to, one, brief them on the discussions that took place between the 5 heads of state that constitute the BRICS nations, but also to talk about how the rest of the continent can then tap into whatever resources, ideas, and everything else that has been discussed here. And President Jacob Zuma and the 5 heads of state walking in now, and that session about to begin any minute from now. Now, one of the decisions that the BRICS Summit has taken is the establishment of a development bank. Now, that bank is not necessarily going to compete against your International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. But because of the shortcomings where some of the BRICS countries believe that the developing nations are being shortchanged, they do believe that the most powerful Western nations are essentially dictating the agenda of both the World Bank and the IMF. They have come up with the idea of their own development bank. Now, Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Finance here in South Africa, tried to explain to us a little earlier. He spoke to Mbongeni Mutwa from our economics desk about how, one, the importance of the BRICS Summit, but two, how this development bank is going to function. And here's how that conversation went.
At the beginnings of a very important process, a process that demonstrates that economic power is shifting in the world. If it had not been for particularly India, China, and Brazil, the world would have been in serious trouble after the 2008 banking crisis, and is today recognized that those are the countries that provide the locomotives which drive the global economy. However, what we see in Europe and the uncertainty that comes from Europe is dampening their growth as well. So Brazil last year had serious difficulties, which they are now working hard at recovering from, and they hope to see somewhere between 3.5% and 4% growth. India, they hope to see about 5.5%, China about 8.5%, but they still provide an important engine room on the one hand, and on the other hand, we, as you can see from the Cyprus situation, we seem to move from one crisis into another as far as the European situation is concerned.
One of the narratives that we saw following today's news that there's been this agreement about the bank was that this bank will rival the IMF and the World Bank. Is this fact or fiction?
No, I've been explaining many times, and let me try once again, that one of the things we're learning is that many of our developing countries haven't had investment in infrastructure. What do we mean by infrastructure? What we know as highways in South Africa, what we know as rail, both for passenger and for freight purposes, efficient ports, efficient energy plants, efficient hydroelectric power stations if they apply in a particular situation. And there's social infrastructure, housing, schools, clinics, and so on. And India alone would say that they have and they need about $1 trillion of investment in infrastructure. On the African continent, we talk about $100 to $200 billion every year for 20 years. We ourselves, over the last few years, have been talking around 850 billion for every 3-year cycle. And we have a portfolio of projects that could go up to 4 trillion rands as well. So there's a huge demand, A, for infrastructure, and B, for financing infrastructure. The second question is whether the existing institutions are able to supply that kind of financing, and they aren't able to. For various reasons, they have ceilings to the money that they can supply, but also their governance systems are based on a particular set of power relations that goes back in history. So BRICS is and the BRICS Bank is an important starting point to a new way of doing things, and is an addition to what is available, and it's complementary to the institutions that actually exist at this point in time.
South African Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan talking about how that BRICS Bank that was discussed here and for which the respective countries' ministers and central bank governors have gotten a go-ahead. There's word here is that it's going to be started through a $10 billion fund contribution from each of the 5 BRICS countries, but that of course is subject to confirmation. That is just the estimates and rumors that people have said there. Well, we now cross over to Zimbabwe Lodge, where President Jacob Zuma is about to kick off the proceedings there. The BRICS countries' leaders are about to brief 15 heads of state from the rest of the continent. Let's cross over now to the Zimbabwe Lodge.
But the unfortunate thing is that we are starting a little late than we had budgeted. And some of our colleagues in BRICS, they have commitments at 6. So our time might be the usual thing. As people say, time is our enemy. But let me greet everyone. Good afternoon. Bonjour. Boa tarde. I would like us to start, and I'm sure you have seen how the agenda goes. We'll just follow it as it is, except that we'll just bring some adjustments in terms of time as to how much time do we have, and therefore that determines how much time many of us would have to say something. Your colleagues, we thought from BRICS it was absolutely important that for the first time that we have BRICS in our continent, we should have this interaction. And therefore it is on the basis of that we are here. Let me, as the program says, make the opening remarks so that we begin the process. Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, dear colleagues, ministers and senior officials, welcome and thank you for accepting my invitation to join me for the first ever BRICS Leaders Africa Dialogue Retreat under the theme of Unlocking Africa's Potential, BRICS and Africa Cooperation on Infrastructure. As you are aware, the 5th BRICS Summit, the first hosted on the African soil, has just concluded. We meet in exciting times. Our countries continue to record strong economic growth despite the weaker global economic environment. Over the past decade, we have seen an acceleration of commercial and strategic engagements between the BRICS countries and Africa. BRICS nations have contributed to Africa's economic emergence, provided new options, and helped to elevate the continent's contemporary global relevance. Like Africa, the BRICS nations are striving to enhance inclusive economic growth that will lead to an increase in the creation of decent and sustainable jobs, to advance the fight against poverty and accelerate the economic transformation of our countries. We also aspire and work to realize a more equitable global political, financial, and economic system. The BRICS grouping has emerged as a powerful formation with 43% of the global population. The BRICS countries now constitute the largest trading partners of Africa and the largest new investors. In Africa, we face an immense opportunity to reshape our future and construct a new economic paradigm. It is up to Africa to ensure that these opportunities are fully utilized and that this new dawn leads to the continent truly becoming the next global growth center. In this regard, the BRICS leaders have undertaken to take their cooperation forward to support Africa's efforts to accelerate the diversification and modernization of its economies. This will be done through infrastructure development, knowledge exchange, and support for increased access to technology, enhance capacity building, and investment in human capital within the framework of NEPAD. The highest importance is attached to economic growth that supports development and stability in Africa, as many of our countries have not yet realized their full economic potential. It is with this in mind that the key objectives of the Treaty of the Retreat to allow the African side the opportunity to present strategic cross-border priority infrastructure and industrial projects promoting interconnectivity between African countries and regions. To strengthen BRICS collaboration with the African Union Commission, the NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, and the regional economic communities on support for the implementation of the infrastructure projects. to further strengthen the alignment of the BRICS countries, bilateral and continental programs under the auspices of AU programs, collectively and individually, with priorities identified under the African Agenda for Development and Regional Integration, and to attract BRICS investment into Africa. African countries have made significant progress in identifying infrastructure projects that will be critical to unlocking the continent's potential and promoting regional integration. Yet, despite the evident potential benefits of these projects, Africa continues to struggle with securing long-term infrastructure financing. Among the reasons for this difficulty is the operational model of existing development banks, whose borrowing is more readily geared towards single country funding. The BRICS process could lead to a funding model that promotes more multi-country projects and accelerates the pace of regional integration. Another problem faced by African countries is the constraint of bringing projects to bankability. This is largely due to the scarcity of project preparation funding and the necessary technical expertise. Again, the BRICS process could play a critical role in addressing this challenge in being able to bring project proposals to the market for financing. Your Excellencies, through our interactions here today, we will have the opportunity to engage on measures to strengthen cooperation and promote regional integration through infrastructure development and in industrialization. We need to industrialize Africa. And we can only do so if we are able to partner with countries that have the possibility to do so. Over the years, countries that could do so historically, they did not see Africa as a place to industrialize. They saw Africa as a place to exploit its resources so that it benefits them rather than the two-way approach. I believe that the BRICS grouping offers a possibility that we could interact with countries that are ready to say, let us partner, let us join hands and work together. And in that way, I think is an opportunity that Africa has not had over the years. So it's an opportunity we believed it was important for us to initiate. There are very exciting ideas that BRICS has been discussing. And in our view, the fact that we have linked to BRICS is something which we could describe as a window of opportunity. And I think it is up to us whether we utilize that window of opportunity as well as BRICS countries. It's not a one-sided story. And we believe that this meeting could trigger an interaction that really could see Africa being able to get what it has not been getting over the period of really linking up with people who are keen to see Africans in Africa developing to a level where they could stand on their own feet. Your Excellencies, I wish you well in your deliberations in this very short meeting, which is a start, and I'm hoping that there will be many more. Thank you very much for listening. I'll then proceed with our agenda. By allowing our chairperson of the AU, who must address us for about 5 minutes, I would like to invite the Prime Minister of Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Mr. Haile Mariam Desalegn, as the chairperson of the African Union, to make his opening statement. You have the floor, your colleague.
Your Excellency Jacob Zuma, President of the Republic of South Africa, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank His Excellency President Jacob Zuma for hosting us to have dialogue between BRICS and African leaders. It is an honor and a privilege for me to address you as the chairperson of the African Union in this important forum for dialogue between BRICS and African leaders. Permit me to say a few words on the background to our meeting here in Durban on African soil. In recent years, the emerging economies have been playing an increasingly important role in the global economy, as was dramatically revealed in the wake of the financial and economic crisis in 2008 and the subsequent creation of the G20. At this third meeting in the United States in September 2009, the G20 was appropriately declared to be the premier economic forum, at the heart of which are the BRICS countries. Africa also has made significant progress during this period. Economic growth gathered momentum with an average rate of around 5% since the start of the millennium, only to be briefly interrupted following the economic crisis in the developed world. The continent has now more or less regained its former trajectory of growth. The forecast for the future is also encouraging. The Economics magazine, which once dubbed Africa as a hopeless continent, recently regretted its grim characterization of the continent and recognized for a change that Africa is the world's fastest growing continent just now, while adding that over the next decade, its GDP is expected to rise by an average of 6% a year. It is becoming clearer and clearer that Africa is set to become the next growth pole, ready to take its rightful place in the global economy. That's why this meeting is well placed to forge a strong partnership between BRICS countries and Africa. This is a partnership between a group of emerging global economies that, through the generous use of their huge sovereign wealth funds, have become largest investors and trade partners in our continent, on one hand, and a continent with over 1
Well, we apologize for that loss in transmission. We are going to go back live. We seem to have restored the connection. Okay, we still seem to be having a problem with that transmission. You are watching a live broadcast, the African Union putting forward its perspective, its regard for the BRICS summit that was concluded here about a couple of hours ago. But also he is about to address the session of BRICS heads of state and government leaders about how Africa hopes to take advantage, the priorities that Africa sees as being the sort of agenda or things that need to be put squarely on the BRICS agenda. For now, though, let's go back to Johannesburg, where we're going to take a quick commercial break, and hopefully by the time we get back, we will have restored that transmission.
Low-income and developing countries, such an arrangement would also make an additional contribution to global growth by providing good investment outlets for the excess global savings that we have today. Funding infrastructure projects that help integrate regional blocs have paramount importance in enhancing competitiveness and in boosting trade and investment. It therefore goes without saying that giving due emphasis to regional infrastructure projects would help to enhance the continent's competitiveness, thereby enabling it to have the rightful place in the global economic order. We will be speaking our needs in infrastructure development in one voice through NEPAD in its continental program called PIDA, Program for Africa Infrastructure Development. It is indeed gratifying to learn that you all are already in agreement on the issue of establishing BRICS-led development bank, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend you for taking this initiative to heart. It is my sincere hope that progress could be made in this regard sooner rather than later. Let me conclude, Mr. Chairman, by wishing us all fruitful deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that statement. It is now my pleasure to call on Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma to make a statement as chairperson of the African Union Commission. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Excellencies, heads of state and government. First, let me express my gratitude to President of the Republic of South Africa and all the heads of states of BRICS for offering us this unique opportunity to meet with them at a continental level. Acknowledging that there's been growing engagement between BRICS and African countries at a bilateral level, we think it is important to meet at this forum between Africa and BRICS. BRICS is an important bloc, emerging and re-emerging economies whose economic power is ever increasing. On the other hand, Africa sees this century as its century. We see Africa as a future growth pole. And this meeting is taking place during the year which is our 50th anniversary for the formation of our organization. And this gives us a unique opportunity to not only look back at the last 50 years, but to look forward at the next 50 years. And indeed, in the next 50 years, we think that Africa will be a prosperous continent at peace with itself and also playing a very important role in global affairs. But of course, for this to happen, a number of things have to be realized. Africa has been increasingly democratizing and improving its governance and law and order. It has also improved greatly its business environment. And therefore, BRICS should look towards Africa as an investment destination. In a study that was done by ECA recently, it shows that Africa has actually increased its trade with the BRIC countries more than any other region in the past few years. And also that the BRICS countries have increased their imports from Africa. And therefore, this gives us a unique opportunity to look even closer at this relationship, which is based on mutual trust and mutual respect. Africa is home for an expanding young population, projected to be at 2 billion in 2050, and therefore we are expanding our skills base, though we still need to do more, and therefore it's going to be very important, as I heard the President say, there's going to be technological exchanges, and we also need to exchange research information and to make sure that the young population in Africa is able to drive its own development on the continent. But also the continent is endowed with natural resources, which may be used as a launch pad for industrialization. We also have an expansive arable land, which we intend to increase both agricultural production and agro-industries. And these are also opportunities for the BRICS countries. And we hope that BRICS will be a strategic partner based on a win-win situation and a new partnership in industrialization, infrastructure. Trade hopefully will increase as it's been doing over the past few years. And also, Africa is a great place for tourism. Of course, all these will unlock Africa's potential, and we are optimistic that we can work together at the Commission level, working with the regional economic communities, which are the building blocks for the integration of Africa. And we hope we can also benefit from the large experience of the BRIC countries, some of whom have come from situations like the ones that we are still facing and the challenges that Africa is still facing. And therefore, we would like to once more thank the President of South Africa for hosting us, and we hope that this partnership will be enduring and will see Africa indeed become prosperous, provide jobs for its youth, and modernize in the next 50 years. I thank you.
Thank you indeed, Madam Chair, for that statement. Without any waste of time, I'll then give the leaders of BRICS an opportunity to make statements before we get to the closer session. It is therefore my honor now to invite Her Excellency Dilma Rousseff, the President of the Federal Republic of Brazil to take the floor. Thank you, Madam. You have the floor.
Queria cumprimentar os senhores presidentes Jacob Zuma, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping e o primeiro-ministro Manmohan Singh, integrantes do grupo BRICS. Queria cumprimentar os chefes de Estado aqui presentes, a começar de todos os presidentes e primeiros-ministros africanos que comparecem a esse fórum BRICS África. Queria cumprimentar também o excelentíssimo senhor Ato Haile Mariam Desalegn, primeiro-ministro da Etiópia e presidente da União Africana. Queria cumprimentar a senhora Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, presidenta da Comissão da União Africana. Queria cumprimentar também os ministros e outras autoridades de Estado aqui presentes. Senhoras e senhores, é com grande satisfação que reencontro agora em Durban muitas das lideranças com as quais estive em visitas bilaterais, em encontros multilaterais e em Malabo na última terceira cúpula América do Sul-África em fevereiro.
Africa-South America ESSA summit in February. I would therefore like to thank President Zuma for the opportunity to address and discuss the topic of infrastructure, which is really central and key for the ultimate development of our nations, BRICS, member states, and also African countries at large. We are quite certain that when we improve transportation, communications, energy supply, and logistics, all of our countries gain in terms of economic improvement as well as the well-being of our populations. We know all too well that both in Africa as well as in South America and in many parts of the world, regional organizations play a foremost role in expanding projects that ultimately help further and economically structure our countries. Important steps are being taken, in particular by the presidential initiative on champions in infrastructure, as well as by the program for infrastructure development in Africa, both in the context of NEPAD. In contrast with the international scenario marked by crisis, Africa nevertheless experiences great economic momentum. Out of the countries with the highest growth forecast by 2015, 7 are in Africa. As a group, BRICS is Africa's second largest trade partner and by far the one bloc of countries with the fastest growth rate. The BRICS Africa trade flow or current has increased 10 times in 1 decade and is currently above $330 billion US, figures for 2012. However, our partnership can go way beyond trade, and it does go way beyond trade. For Brazil, it is absolutely key and essential to put investments, technical cooperation, technology transfers, to include social technologies and other cooperation tools to the service of local development of African nations. In today's meeting, we are discussing precisely how we can apply this partnership between BRICS and Africa to foster those goals. We should jointly build a number of different bridges: maritime, air, cultural, educational, tourism, investments, and trade-related bridges. Bridges that are much needed in order to ensure closer ties between and among our societies. Brazil is a country that is committed to Africa because the Brazilian nation itself is ultimately made up by a very strong African component in our history. Actually, Brazil is the largest country with African population outside of Africa. For those reasons, we have been strongly committed to expand our relations with Africa. And I would like to thank the African leaders who spoke before me so far for their very enriching remarks. And may I say that we are keenly aware of the fact that Africa is a continent endowed with abundant mineral resources, water resources, and with tremendous bioenergetic potentiality and biodiversity, in addition to a vibrant culture as well as a young people that is willing and determined to forge its own development pathways. That awareness is absolutely important for us to foster a partnership among equals, a partnership that will prove to be a win-win partnership, a partnership that will be precisely the opposite of what they did to us in our continent in the past few centuries. Significant steps have been taken by a substantial number of our nations with a view to fully tap into and utilize that potentiality in different sectors of interest. Partnerships, for example, in fields such as agriculture, where we, Brazil, share huge similarities with Africa. Since some millions and millions of years ago, we were part and parcel of one same continent, Africa and Latin America. So partnerships are available in mining, agriculture, and so forth. There has been significant progress as well in our partnership in areas such as education, healthcare, social policies, food security. I believe that the opportunity that we have before us today, where the BRICS bloc of nations is willing to share and contribute to help overcome all of the challenges on the table, this is truly a strategic point in time. We have gained much experience in tackling infrastructure shortcomings, and that experience can contribute and help guide our joint efforts. Brazil has Brazilian companies that are currently operating in Africa in areas such as civil construction. For instance, Brazil has also established partnerships with a view to providing financing, such as, for example, the recent financing partnership signed between the Brazilian National Development Bank for Economic and Social Development, BNDES, and its African counterpart, the African Development Bank. We wish to share with our African partners the experience of putting into place our socially oriented programs, because up until recently, Brazil was a country marked by deep-seated social inequality. Our social programs have proven successful in promoting social mainstreaming or social inclusion, and which cover anything from income distribution, job creation, and access to government services and utilities such as electricity, water supply, as well as basic services such as healthcare and education. May I use the opportunity to say that, accordingly, and in that regard, a major initiative has been undertaken with the recent creation or establishment of the BRICS Development Bank, which is, of course, open and available for partnerships with developing countries, especially and above all in Africa. May I also say, before I conclude, that all of us are willing to keep on tapping into and seeking out innovative, pioneering mechanisms that will allow us to expand our cooperation efforts with Africa. I am quite certain that the 21st century is truly the one century where the major novelty will be actual presence and an increasingly robust presence of Africa in the economic, political, and cultural scene in the world. We Brazilians are keenly aware of the tremendous contribution that Africa has given to our country. Africa actually stands for a significant share of our intermarried population, and that contributed and made our population able to take a very optimistic attitude towards life. Furthermore, it has also given Brazil tremendous ability to work as a people, as well as tremendous determination, and is part and parcel of our cultural background. Once again, may I thank you all and say that this is truly a unique and special moment in time. It is my belief that the BRICS Africa partnership broadens our ability to change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President, for those good words. Without taking much time, I will therefore like to invite the President of the Russian Federation, President Vladimir Putin, to take the floor. You have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our first meeting of this kind, and first and foremost, I'd like to greet all the leaders of the African states. As the President of Brazil has just said, Africa has been developing rapidly, faster than most other regions in the world. This is despite some problems, external and internal ones. Suffice it to say that the growth of aggregate GDP of Africa is around 5% now, and forecasts say that by 2020 the total GDP of African countries will reach $2.6 trillion, which is a 35% increase. This pace is an additional incentive for interaction between BRICS and the African countries. BRICS companies actively enter the African markets. Total investment in various sectors of the African economy is on the rise, starting with the traditional extraction of mineral resources and reserves and agriculture, and up to including also high-tech and banking sector. BRICS countries jointly defend the interests and rights of Africa and other countries in transition. They advocate for increasing their role and influence in the global governance system, specifically in the international financial and economic institutions. For many years and decades, Russia has been providing direct assistance to the African continent. Let me note that we have written off more than $20 billion of debt, and in this respect, we rank the leader of the G8 countries. We plan to take additional efforts to provide debt relief, and such intergovernmental agreements in the framework of exchange debt for assistance mechanisms have been concluded with Tanzania, Zambia, Mozambique, to the tune of $263.6 million. Russian companies implement investment projects with all the states of North Africa and with 11 sub-Saharan countries. Russian universities teach around 8,000 African students. Half of them get public scholarships. In 2012, sub-Saharan countries received around 1,000 scholarships. This year, we plan to further increase the number of the scholarships. Ladies and gentlemen, in Africa they say a friend is closer than a brother. I'm sure that this meeting will contribute to strengthening our win-win cooperation in very many areas. I thank you for your attention.
Muito obrigado, Sua Excelência, pelas suas declarações. Sem mais,
taking more time, I would like to give the floor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh. You have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Excellencies,
Excelências,
ladies and gentlemen of the
senhoras e
media,
senhores, membros da comunicação social,
I am delighted at the opportunity to interact with distinguished African leaders in the unique setting of the BRICS Africa Dialogue Forum. Besides sharing our developmental perspectives, we also look forward to understanding the African perspective on how we can advance our common interests in international forums and global institutions. India shares an historical and emotional bond with the people of Africa, forged from our giant struggle against colonialism and our quest for a just world order. Excellencies, Africa today is experiencing rapid growth, progress, democratic transition, and increasing stability. Africa's success will not only transform lives here, but also increase the wider regional stability and global prosperity. This is therefore a moment of great hope and opportunity for Africa and the world. BRICS and Africa have similar developmental challenges and shared concerns on a range of global issues. The synergies of resources, skills, and opportunities between us create boundless possibilities for expanding areas of cooperation. We can work together to promote public and private investments in resources, infrastructure, manufacturing, and services in Africa. We can contribute to inclusive development by strengthening micro, small, and medium enterprises, improved access for African countries to BRICS economies, and innovative trade finance can stimulate trade and boost African enterprises. The consequent growth and employment in Africa can help all our countries deal better with the vagaries of the global economy. Each BRICS country is a partner in Africa's development. India's own partnership with Africa, bilaterally and through the India-Africa Forum summits, covers the entire gamut of cooperative endeavors, with a particular focus on cooperation in the development of human resources and capacity building. These include a commitment to build 100 institutions in Africa and an offer of 22,000 scholarships over the next 3 years, concessional assistance of nearly $7.5 billion, a Pan-Africa e-network, development of micro and small enterprises, research and development, supporting private sector cooperation, and duty-free access to 34 least developed countries. I am sure that together, BRICS countries can leverage their strength into a much higher level of cooperation and collaboration with Africa. I thank South Africa for this valuable initiative, and I look forward to productive discussion at this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that very important statement. Without the waste of time, I would now invite the President of the Republic of China, His Excellency Xi Jinping, to take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
尊敬的佐马总统
Your Excellency President Jacob Zuma, dear colleagues,
尊敬的各位非洲国家元首
distinguished leaders of African countries, cabinet ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. This is my 6th visit to Africa, and it is really nice to see so many African friends. I feel very much at home. Today, for the first time, we are having the BRICS leaders meeting in Africa. We are sending a message of unity, cooperation, and mutual benefit to the whole world. Also, for the first time, we are having the BRICS Leaders Africa Dialogue Forum. It gives expression to the political will of both sides to pursue common development on the basis of equality and inclusiveness. There is every reason for the BRICS countries to enhance cooperation with Africa. Africa accounts for 15% of the world's population and 20% of the world's land area. This is a vast and richly endowed continent. In recent years, African countries have gained greater political strength through unity, enjoyed sustained economic growth, and scored proud achievements. They have made greater contribution to world peace and development. It is fair to say that without Africa's peace and development, there can be no stability and prosperity in the world. Without Africa's participation, international affairs cannot be properly managed. And without Africa's voice, the global governance systems cannot be vibrant. The 21st century is bound to be a century that witnesses the rise of Africa. A rising Africa brings opportunities to the BRICS countries, and the development in the BRICS countries also generates opportunities for Africa. If the 4 billion people of our countries work together, we can make the global economy more balanced, the international relations more democratic, and the foundation for world peace and development more solid. China is a trustworthy friend and a sincere partner of Africa, and it has stood with African countries, rain or shine. China supports the BRICS in forging a partnership with Africa and working with Africa to advance development, integration, and industrialization, promote global economic growth, and bring benefits to all developing countries. China will also continue to support Africa's development, integration, and industrialization process under the framework of South-South cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that statement as well. Thank you to the BRICS and African leaders who have made statements. That brings the open session of the retreat to a close. At this point, I would request the media to gracefully bow out of the meeting for a cup of tea outside. We remain in a closed session. So please, good colleagues,
well, the chairperson of the session between the 5 BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, talking there to the leaders of the 15 African states that have been invited here at the conclusion, at the end of this BRICS summit that started yesterday. The leaders of India, Brazil, China, and Russia especially saying all the right things, reaching out to the continent to say we care about you, but we believe that the relationship is that of mutual benefits. In other words, it is not a one-way traffic where before Africa's relationship with its colonizers, former colonizers, was in fact a one-way traffic where everyone descended on the continent, looted the resources, and took everything back home. There's a promise by these 4 BRICS nations leaders that the relationship with Africa is going to be completely different from anything that we as a continent may have experienced before. Some of you will of course know that the BRICS group of nations is also not necessarily a homogeneous group. I mean, India has its own ambitions and intentions, so is China, so is Brazil, and so is Russia. But of course, from those speeches, promises being made that that relationship is going to change. But just to give you a bit of context, if I may, to understand that how much work would need to go into the relationship between the BRICS countries and the rest of the continent as things stand, according to a UN Conference on Trade and Development report that was released this week. I mean, it's a mere 2.5% of foreign investment by BRICS countries that goes in to other countries in the group. In other words, even within BRICS countries themselves, there is a lot of work that needs to be done because the investment levels, the trade levels are very, very low at the moment. If you compare that especially against the fact that 40% of foreign investment goes to the developed world's largest economies, which is the European Union, the United States, and Japan. So within the BRICS countries themselves, in other words, if you look at investment that goes into South Africa, as opposed to investment from the rest of the BRICS nations that goes to the rest of the continent, it is very skewed, and that needs to be fixed. Again, if you come now to the continent, which is what is the subject of the discussion that is going to go on now behind closed doors, Africa, which is home to, as I said earlier, to several of the world's fastest growing economies, it drew less than 5% of the total investment of the BRICS nations, which is very, very low. That report pointed those out. France and the United States still have the highest rate of foreign investment in Africa, which hopefully is what is going to be the subject of the discussion behind those closed doors. Now, with that, we come to the end of this special broadcast brought to you by SABC News. From me, Vuyo Mvoko, and the rest of the crew, it's a good afternoon.
There are times I wish to live over and over again.